So hello and welcome back to Book and Things, and welcome to the second week of What the Dickens. Lots of Dickens to be had this week, and so much Dickens love. I'm so excited for the end of the week when I get to talk about my favourite Dickens novels ever, which are basically my favourite novels ever because I love Dickens. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about A Tale of Two Cities. Chapter 1. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. I have to say, I love the opening of Tale of Two Cities, and I love the ending. I think it has, like, one of the best opening paragraphs in Dickens, and one of the best closing paragraphs in Dickens. It is beautiful. So A Tale of Two Cities is quite a different Dickens novel. Alongside Barnaby Rudge, it is one of Dickens's two historical novels. A Tale of Two Cities is set sort of before and during the French Revolution in the 1780s. It is set partly in London and partly in Paris. Those are the two cities, and it kind of explores the build-up towards the French Revolution and how a few particular individuals from England and France get caught up in the French Revolution. I love A Tale of Two Cities. I first read it when I was in school, and I remember I liked it, but I didn't like it quite as much as a lot of other Dickens novels I'd read. And then I studied it in university, not in an English module in fact, but in a history module. In third year I did a history module on the French Revolution, but it was a kind of historiographical module rather than a history module. It was a module that was about the history of history, not just about history. So we weren't studying the French Revolution so much as how historians and various people have thought about the French Revolution. And so for this module I wrote an essay comparing Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities and Carlyle's A History of the French Revolution, which were written about the same time in the Victorian period. And the essay I wrote was kind of examining Victorian perspectives on the French Revolution. It was really, really interesting to reread it in that light and to study it in comparison with some actual historical writing from the 19th century about the French Revolution. I love A Tale of Two Cities a great deal, and I really loved studying it in that way. Now, A Tale of Two Cities is, as I said, quite a different Dickens novel because of it being historical. It is a bit like Barnaby Rudge in that often it focuses on kind of mob scenes, and you get a lot of description of what crowds are doing rather than just individuals. But I personally think A Tale of Two Cities is a much more sophisticated novel than Barnaby Rudge, and we do see the French Revolution through a few particular individuals who really offer you insight into a lot of different sides from it. So at the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities, a young woman named Lucy Manette discovers that her father, who she thought was dead, has actually been in a prison in France for many, many years. He was consigned to the Bastille as a political prisoner for saying something bad about an aristocratic family in France, completely unfairly kept in the Bastille for years. But at the beginning of the book he is reunited with his daughter. Another central character in Tale of Two Cities is a young man called Charles Darnay, and Charles Darnay is a French aristocrat, but he really despises his relation, the Marquis, and he really does not like the way that aristocrats behave in Paris, so he has moved to London. He sort of falls in love with Lucy Manette. And there is another young man called Sidney Carton, and I love Sidney Carton a great deal. He is for me a precursor of Eugene Wrayburn of Our Mutual Friend, who is one of my favourite Dickensian characters. More on that at the end of the week. I think Sidney Carton is a really interesting kind of tragic sort of hero. He is a disillusioned, careless young man. He is a lawyer, but he doesn't like his profession. He isn't happy, he drinks too much, but he does have this kind of redeeming hope and love and heroicism in him that is really important and really significant to the book. And a few other central characters in A Tale of Two Cities. I find it much easier to introduce Dickens novels by their characters than their plots, apparently. But we also have a few figures in France who are of importance, primarily the Defarges. Now, Monsieur and Madame Defarge own a wine shop in Paris, and they have quite a lot to do with kind of revolutionary action in Paris, and they are very much against the aristocracy. They hate them. They are often organising things to do with the revolution, and Madame Defarge, who is a brilliant character, more on that in a minute, she is constantly knitting all the time in the most sinister, brilliant way. And basically what happens in A Tale of Two Cities is, for various reasons, Charles Darnay gets caught up in the French Revolution and everything kind of goes terribly wrong from there. It is a very dramatic and engaging and exciting book. A lot happens in A Tale of Two Cities. There is a lot of drama. It is not a happy, cheerful book. It is very dark, and there is a lot of kind of misery and intrigue and real sort of harshness and brutality going on there, but it examines the French Revolution in a really interesting way. Now, there are many things I love about A Tale of Two Cities, but one of the things I really love about it is how Dickens managed to look at the French Revolutions from both sides. sort of. He definitely hates the aristocracy. Like, Charles Darnay's uncle is really one of the most loathsome characters in all of Dickens, and he is completely careless about anyone's lives but his own, and he is clearly very horrible. But Charles Darnay is not, and Charles Darnay gets unfairly caught up in the French Revolution, and Dickens really captures and explores the brutality and the violence of the French Revolution while sympathising with the things that caused it. He very, very interestingly examines the causes of the French Revolution, and for Dickens, the causes of the revolution and the reason why people are rioting, etc., is justified. It is completely justified, but the way they go about it is not. And that is a really interesting dynamic within A Tale of Two Cities. It is a brilliant, fascinating book to read, especially if you're interested in the French Revolution or the kind of legacy of the French Revolution. You really do see things from both sides in a way that is brilliant. I think his description as well of kind of mob mentality and crowd scenes in A Tale of Two Cities is really brilliant and really moving. He takes that kind of interest in mobs from Barnaby Rudge, but really develops it much more strongly in A Tale of Two Cities. The foreshadowing in A Tale of Two Cities is brilliant and superb, and the examination of what is going on in France and similar things that may or may not be going on in England at the time are just really brilliant and so well done. I think the plot as well and the kind of drama of it is very well done and very sort of well set up. It is a really interesting, complicated novel, really moving, really emotionally powerful. It's not as funny as Dickens's other novels. It is, as I said, very dark, and there is a lot of violence and kind of power and issues in it, but for all the horror in A Tale of Two Cities, it is really beautiful and a fascinating novel. I also think Madame Defarge is one of the best villains in Dickens. The second best villain in Dickens, in fact. The best villain in Dickens is Bradley Headstone from Our Mutual Friend. More into him at the end of the week. But Madame Defarge is a brilliant villain, and she is a villain because she is one of the people who kind of really wants Charles Darnay dead, and for Madame Defarge, anyone associated with the aristocracy is immediately, by default, evil. But you understand why she thinks that, and the way her characterisation is explored and the way she is presented, you completely understand her. Even though she is merciless and harsh and cruel, you understand why, and the world has been merciless to her, so of course she is going to be merciless to them. Fascinating as well, because she's one of Dickens's few female villains, and the way Dickens deals with that and explores her personality and her motivations is really interesting. I think she's a brilliant character. Monsieur Defarge, her husband, is likewise very interesting, and their kind of dynamic is done very well. In terms of things I like less about A Tale of Two Cities, I would say the only thing I don't like about it is Lucy Manette, who is the kind of young heroine of the book. For me, Lucy Manette doesn't have much personality, and I kind of wonder what she's doing so late in Dickens's career. Like, Lucy Manette for me has a lot more in common with Dickens's early heroines in the early half of his career than she does with his later heroines, and yet A Tale of Two Cities is one of Dickens's last few novels, but for some reason Lucy Manette, for me, isn't really fully developed as a person, and she really harks back to those early Dickensian heroines who don't have much personality and are a bit pathetic. I mean, she has a kind of strength considering the stuff she has to go through, but it's never really fully explored, and I wish she was a more interesting, complex character, because by that point in Dickens's career, I know he could do that. He could write brilliant women, but Lucy Manette is not one of them. It sometimes feels in A Tale of Two Cities like Dickens got so carried away with writing about the French Revolution that there are a few characters he kind of forgot to fully develop. Charles Darnay is another character who is very kind of moral and upstanding, a little bit perhaps like Nicholas Nickleby, but he's not that complex and interesting a character. I find Sydney Carton much more engaging, and I find Madame Defarge and what's going on in France much more engaging than Lucy Manette and what's going on in England. And that for me is really why A Tale of Two Cities isn't higher, because I don't find Lucy Manette and Charles Darnay that convincing as characters and that convincing as a couple. I've mentioned before how I prefer Dickens' darker later novels to his earlier completely comic novels, but actually when I really think about it, what I love is those books of his that are a bit of a mix between the two, where we have the darkness and the complex themes, but we also have the humour. And for me, A Tale of Two Cities is not very funny. There are a few characters who are, I think, supposed to be a bit more entertaining, such as Jeremy Cruncher, but I don't really find Jeremy Cruncher that entertaining as a character or that engaging. So, although I am very fond of A Tale of Two Cities, and I think it is a really beautiful novel, and in fact, I think it would probably appeal to a lot of people who might not like some of Dickens's other novels, if that makes sense, but it is not my favourite perhaps because it doesn't feel as Dickensian. I don't know. Anyway, all in all, I do love A Tale of Two Cities. I think it is a beautiful, complex and fascinating novel. I highly recommend it. So anyway, that is all I have to say about A Tale of Two Cities, and I'll be back tomorrow talking about yet another Dickens book.